Alright, so today we're going to be talking about genetic variation. We talked a little bit about genes and what they are, that you inherit them from your parents, that they're things that are passed down over time. And so today we're going to focus on how those genes create biodiversity. Biodiversity has to do with the differences. Diversity means differences. And bio means life. So these are the differences in living things, okay? And another way to call or talk about it is to say that it is genetic variation. Variation also means differences. So these are differences in the genetics which creates biodiversity. And biodiversity if I can spell, increases the chances of survival. Okay, so the more biodiversity, the better chance an organism has to survive. So let's talk about that genetic variation. Genetic variation is the difference. I'm going to have to pop that just a little bit. In organisms because of the uniqueness, right? Because each of you are unique because of your genes, and its uniqueness because of each organism's DNA, right? This causes diversity or differences, variation. And if you have these fillable notes, then I would even maybe color in this word with all different colors so that you remember variation means that there are lots of differences in our DNA, and it has to do with getting part of our DNA from one parent and another part of our DNA from another parent. So it causes a great diversity, a great difference, and those differences make us stronger because the best traits, the most strong traits, are the ones that are passed on. Finish coloring this guy really quick because it's going to remind us that our differences are valuable and our genetic differences are really valuable. So we're going to come over here to the side and we're going to remember that this is a double helix, right? And this is the shape of our DNA. This DNA is kind of like a twisted ladder, and it's located in the nucleus of a eukaryotic cell, right? So if we've got our eukaryotic cell, we've got our nucleus, the DNA is in that nucleus, right? And it's very, very small. This is obviously blown up really, really big so that we can see it, but that is found in the nucleus of the cell. So what makes it so special? Why does each organism have a unique set of DNA? Well, remember, when we're talking about biodiversity, we're talking mostly about sexual reproduction. That's reproduction that involves two parents. The genetic material is combined to produce new offspring that is completely different genetically from both parents. Each gives half of the DNA to their offspring, right? So the DNA, half comes from the female parent, half comes from the male parent, and it creates offspring that is a unique combination. And remember, offspring are the babies. This is why you don't look exactly like your mom or exactly like your dad. You look a little bit like mom and a little bit like dad because each of them is giving you half of your genetic makeup. And your genetic makeup comes from and is made of your chromosomes. You get exactly 50%, and in humans 50% is 23 of your genetic material, or half of your genetic material, from each parent. You have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and chromosomes are strands of DNA that are coiled and compacted into the nucleus of our cells, right? So we've got these coils of DNA in each of our cells, and in each of these chromosomes we find lots and lots of genes. Now a gene, I'm going to switch colors, is a segment or section of DNA on a chromosome that controls a specific trait, right? Like what color your eyes are or what color your skin is. And so a gene would be just this small section, right? And genes are what determine what our alleles are, because each trait is controlled by a gene that's made up of two alleles. Alleles are a version of a particular trait. So let's say your mom has blonde hair and your dad has brown hair. So those are the two versions of hair color that are going into your genetics, right? Those are the two alleles. Each trait is controlled by a gene, right? That's our section on our chromosome that's made up of two alleles. You get one allele from each parent. An allele is a possible variation. This is just a different version of a gene, right? This is a gene that codes for, remember, traits, things that we can see. If the gene is for eye color, the allele or the version from your mom could be for blue eyes, and the allele or version from your dad could be for brown eyes. So how do we know which color eyes we're going to get? Well, let's look at our next page. At the top of your paper, there's a question. If we get half the DNA from our mom and half the DNA from our dad, then why does one organism sometimes look more like one parent than the other? And that's because these alleles are different versions, and some of them are stronger than others. Some alleles are what we call dominant, and some are recessive. If you have more alleles that are dominant traits from one parent, then you're going to look more like that parent because they have more dominant traits. Now let's talk a little bit more about what we mean by dominant and recessive. Our dominant alleles are stronger. They're more powerful. They're always expressed if they're in the gene, right? These are represented with a capital letter. So we could represent it with capital letters, right? The recessive alleles, on the other hand, these are masked. You can't see them when a dominant allele is present. These are only expressed when both alleles are recessive, right? Both are little letters. And these are represented with a lowercase letter, like B, right? So these are recessive alleles, they're lowercase. These are dominant alleles, these are uppercase. Now these are genes that are coding one big B from the mom, one big B from the dad. One little b from mom, one little b from dad. This is what we call a genotype, right? We're going to talk about that in just a second. Well, when we have two of the same from a parent, we call that homozygous because they're exactly the same, right? Two that are exactly the same, two dominant alleles, two recessive alleles. Homozygous means that you have two of the same version of that gene. So you get either two dominant or two recessive. If they're two dominant, we call it homozygous dominant. If you have two recessive, we call that homozygous recessive. Homo is our word part that means same, right? Hetero is a word part that means different. When we have two different alleles or versions, one allele is dominant and the other is recessive. So we could have big B, little b. But remember, the stronger allele is always expressed if it's here. So if this was for brown eyes, right, versus blue eyes, and the brown eye was dominant, then this offspring would have brown eyes. Okay? So when we talk about brown eyes, that is a phenotype or something that it looks like, the physical expression of a trait. This would be like hair color or eye color. A genotype is the letter combination, the allele combination of each gene from each parent. So you could have big B, big B, big B, little b. You can have little b, right? These are the combinations that we can have. And we get these combinations by looking at Punnett squares. And Punnett squares help us to predict possible outcomes of offspring when we breed two different parents. So we have alleles from mom, we have alleles from dad. And when we combine those alleles, we get a certain characteristic. So let's use our example. D is going to be for our, or big D, is going to be for our dominant. Our dominant characteristic is diamond-shaped eyes. And our recessive characteristic is for circle-shaped eyes. So these capital D's are going to represent diamond-shaped eyes, and our lowercase d's are going to represent circle-shaped eyes. So when we cross them, we bring one down from here, that's big D, and one over from here, right? So we combine, just like a multiplication chart, the letters that are on each side. Now we're still going to bring this capital D down and this lowercase d across. We're going to fill in each of our squares. This capital D is going to come all the way across, and our lowercase d is going to come down. Our lowercase d is going to come across. Our lowercase d is going to come down. If there's a capital letter, it always goes first when we're putting them in order. So when we look at these characteristics, what type of face shape is this one going to have? This one is going to have diamond, right? This one is going to have what type? Remember, if we have this capital D, that means it's still going to show that dominant trait, right? So this one is also going to have diamond shaped. What shape face is this one going to have? This one's going to have a circle shaped face, right? Because it has two of the recessives, so it's going to show the recessive trait, right? So if we were to put this into a percentage, think of it like quarters. What percent chance would offspring of these two parents have of having this genotype, this allele combination? Two capital D's, two dominant traits. We've only got 1 out of 4 squares, so that is 25%. What percent chance are they going to have of getting this genotype, this allele combination, a dominant and a recessive? Well, we've got 2 out of 4, and we know that that is 50%. And then we're only going to have a small chance of having that recessive trait show, right? at 25% as well, 1 out of 4. So Punnett squares help us to predict what offspring of two different parents would have a percentage outcome of, right? Now, if we were looking at the percent outcome of diamond-shaped eyes, what percent of these are going to have diamond-shaped eyes? Well, these, and these. That's 3 out of 4 are going to still have diamond-shaped eyes. So that would be 75% of that phenotype. Only 25% are going to have the recessive trait, the circle-shaped eyes, because that's recessive. Remember, it's masked, it's covered up anytime we have that dominant trait. So these are our genotypes down here, and these are our phenotypes, what it looks like. I hope that helps you guys understand a little bit more about how our genetics work and how you can get traits from your parents that maybe are different than they have because of those recessive qualities, and that biodiversity is increased because we're mixing genetics from two parents and making a new offspring. Have a fantastic day.